Now, at the annual general meeting last year for Polio NZ, we held in Wellington a motion was unanimous for life membership. We awarded to J.B. Munro for the many years of service that he's dedicated to the organisation, serving as an executive officer for 13 years in the capacity of secretary and also as treasurer. He's never been the president, but he has been the vice president during that time. So I hope I got all that correct, JB. To the end of the of his board career, he was a vice president as well. Now, the Polio New Zealand newsletter, which followed the retirement from the board in October 2014, some may remember he was described as indomitable, and his service was stalwart. Well, that's very true too. And how the hell he's fitted everything in, I do not know. He has been on many charitable organisations and a member of parliament. But look, I'm going to get someone up here special as well. My predecessor, former President Edith Morris, I'd like to get her up here and tell you a bit about this man who never stopped working. That's J.B. Munro. Edith Morris, ladies and gentlemen.
You know, every now and then in our life journey, somebody crosses our path who has made a huge difference in society. And I've been fortunate enough to share a few of those years being mentored by J.B. Munro. And when I say mentored, I really mean I was handpicked. I was sitting at the back of the meeting at a polio conference, minding my own business, and I felt a hand on my shoulder, and a voice said, "I've put your name forward for the next president. Any objections? No? Right then." And within a few minutes, the course of my life had changed direction slightly. At the time, I didn't know much about JB, as I'd been out of the country for 25 years, and he certainly knew little about me. But you know, after 6 years of weekly, and sometimes more than weekly, phone calls and Skypes and emails and the occasional face-to-face, and even staying in their home on one occasion, we've got to know each other fairly well. However, I'm constantly surprised at the capacity of this man. He would make comments. He didn't talk a lot about his other involvement, but every now and then there'd be comments like, "I'm off to Wellington to attend an ex-MP's get-together." And being an ex-MP himself, it was important to him to have these annual, I suppose they were old boys, meetings or luncheons. One time he said, "I have an Abbeyfield conference to attend in the UK." And I found out that he was Abbeyfield's international chairman and awarded a very prestigious honour signed by His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales in 2010. Then another day he said there'd been a huge disaster in the Pacific, a typhoon I think it was. And again I found out that the New Zealand wing of Rotary's International Disaster Relief is called Shelterbox. And JB was the first New Zealand secretary of that appointed coordinator for the Samoan Shelterbox effort in 2009. And when that disaster happened, all day he had been overseeing by phone calls backwards and forwards to Melbourne to get that airlifted relief on its way. And then in the evening, he sort of seamlessly came and attended our board's teleconference. So, you know, he was in his probably early 70s, when most of us might have been thinking about retirement, but he was still out there doing. I could go on about his life membership with the parent-to-parent organisation, or his 20 years with the IHC as head man, and his life award with them in 2014. He was inducted into the Attitudes Hall of Fame. He has spoken up and down the country about all sorts of subjects, about his brother, maybe stepbrother or brother, Bert Munro, the fastest Indian. That was one thing he liked to do. He has always been a very much loved dinner speaker for Rotary, where he's held local and international positions. And even further back, he was vice chairman of the 1981 International Year of the Disabled Persons Telethon. Maybe this little bit from the Otago Daily Times expresses JB quite well. JB is a fundraising maestro, a global disability advocate, and plays a pivotal role in the most significant advances in disability rights in the history of New Zealand. It's no wonder that JB was given a QSO in 1990 for public services. He's well respected and recognised and well rewarded for his decades of advocacy, hard work, and hours hanging around airports all around the world. He's left an impact with his presence, but more especially his words. He gets results that counts for thousands of people. Now, why have I said all that? I said it to emphasise that JB juggled many of these roles with other organisations at the same time as he became an officer with the Post-Polio Support Society of New Zealand. His stamina and drive was focused, and he set a very high standard. As Barry mentioned, his services to Polio New Zealand covered 13 years from 2001 to 2014, firstly as Treasurer, then Combined Secretary-Treasurer until he was Vice President for a year. I don't think we realised at the time the value of his expertise and its contribution to Polio New Zealand. He was a well-seasoned spokesperson, seasoned with salt and pepper, and especially the pepper. Yet for all his experiences, there was still the challenge of upskilling into the electronic era and many hours of tutorials with Noel on how to put attachments into emails, how to use the printer, use a voice recorder, set up Skype, but JB never flinched. Now behind JB stands Val, she who must be obeyed, as JB often said. I can see him giving a wee smile. For many, many years, Val handwrote the membership receipts and other tasks before the computer age. She was assisted by JB to distribute Meals on Wheels. She did home visits and lots of church activities. And this year they celebrated 51 years of marriage, and a few months ago JB turned 80. Now, if I was to sum up JB in one word, I would call it feisty. There are other words, but feisty does it. I know without a shadow of a doubt that JB has always had the best interest of those he advocates for, and by any means he made sure we got what was needed. He is a tireless and in true polio form, he has probably been driven to help. You know, we sort of have a striving, driven type of characteristic. And just one story, if I can just take the time before I close. When JB, when did you get polio? Were you about 9 months or a year or something?
Some would say close to birth.
Close to birth. Now, one of his rather terrifying, correct me, methods of treatment was at one stage there'd be 2 kerosene tins, one full of hot water and one full of cold water. And he was dipped in one and dipped in another, I suppose to try and shock the muscles into moving, which actually didn't work. But I often wonder if that feisty characteristic was born during those experiences plus others. Today, it seems such a small thing to bestow life membership on you, JB, after all you've done. But you know it comes from the board and the members of Polio New Zealand with heartfelt appreciation. We recognise you as a pioneer in disability awareness and for the foundation you have laid down for others to continue building upon. You are our champion. We particularly thank you for your volunteer service on behalf of people with polio. Thank you.
I'd like to call on one of our co-patrons right now to come and make the presentation of the plaque to JB Munro, and David Duncan will join us now to make that presentation. If you'd like to come on up, please, JB.
Well, just before we do that, we are thrilled to be here, and I, of course, quite new, been involved with the Duncan Trust for a long time, but quite new to the AGMs and meetings and things. But I do know that JB was very good. He took over the Duncan first trust part of money that we gave, and he was very good at distributing it carefully. So he's very deserved of this life membership as far as I would see. So if you come up, I'll and I should say thank you for including Vic as a patron. Yes,
Thank you very much.
you deserve it. Very well done.
Thank you for all that you do.
We
Well,
don't do
we
anything
don't.
very much. We don't. It's you people that do everything. That was a wonderful valedictory. Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, I'm butting in here. And we were very well aware both of your work, Edith, and the support and the motivation and the energy that you give whatever you do. And so we're absolutely delighted to be part of this valedictory and this presentation.
Thank you very much.
I was wondering about that, but no, it's hopefully what it's changed.
You all right there? You might get my back before you. Good reply. Everyone. I'm not going to go by titles or what have you. We're all together for one cause. But this is an honour. It's a happy occasion, and I have to say that there have been times when it's been difficult to know who could perhaps be considered to be a life member, and I certainly didn't campaign. But thank you very much.
In fact,
for
you
that.
resisted.
For the resistance. I was, it was claimed that I contracted polio, whatever polio is, when I was just a few weeks old. My mother was an unmarried teenager, and I was placed under the care of the child welfare. Well, it was part of the education department back in 1936. I was placed with the Munro family, and as was mentioned earlier, one of the members of the Munro family was Bert Munro, the mad motorcyclist, but a person who gained a lot of fame in a whole variety of ways. He was one of 7, and when Bert and his brothers and sisters were adult, the Munro family took on another 5 state wards, later increased to casual placements from child welfare. And they built a new house in Invercargill and put in an extra bedroom so that when child welfare knocked on the door at 10 o'clock at night, there was going to be a bed available to them. And that was the environment under which I was raised. The polio situation that I've never understood whether I had polio or not, quite frankly. I certainly have a deformed leg. But to all intent and purposes, I was a polio kid whose mother was a 16-year-old lass who was not allowed to see me, not allowed to feed me, and just to stay away but pay board for me. And she told me many years later, I met my mother when I was 50, that she had to pay my board quarterly, and she would go by train from Gore to Invercargill to pay the rent. And she had to this was a decree from child welfare. If anybody seen me grit my teeth, it's usually towards some of the systems that child welfare sort of did. However, my mother, when I met her when I was 50, told me that she would go down by train from Gore to Invercargill and meet with the Munros, but they had been alerted that she was coming. She herself was voluntarily rang each time. But obviously the relationships was arms apart rather than a togetherness. But both sides, both my mother and my foster mother did a great job. No problem about that. But in coming down, I was always taken by one of the other children in the home out for a walk or whatever have you, so that my mother wouldn't see me. This was an imposition from child welfare, and people wonder why I clench my teeth from time to time.
And you're feisty.
Pardon?
And you're feisty.
Oh, and I'm feisty, thank you very much. The Munros were 75 and 70 when I was adopted by them, and all of the other foster children that they cared for, up to 5 or 6 at a time, depending on bed availability and all of those sorts of things. By far and away, the number of children who came in were probably young teenagers, and most of them were girls. I was too young to realise what the field was all about. Child welfare said that I was too young, or the Munros were too old to have me, and with having contracted polio at a few days, a few weeks or a few months, whoever the expert was, and so because I had been sent to Dunedin, to the Dunedin hospital, so that the orthopaedic surgeon could have a go at seeing if he could straighten up my leg. That was a polio leg, if you like. I had the situation of being transferred from Invercargill to Dunedin Hospital, and as an 8-year-old I spent 8 months in Dunedin Hospital with the Kew Convalescent Home, which is out at Kew. And had several operations, and the leg with the foot, which was out like that, the heel was up like that, and they wanted to see if they could do something with the heel and the back part of the lower leg. I had a caliper, and the Munros were told that they were too old to have me, and so when I came out of hospital I was to go to another home. I was told on the Invercargill railway station by child welfare that that was to happen, and I said, I'm not going, I'm going home. And so that sort of was a basic grounding that I had over the years, which led to all of these other things. Sometimes I was right, sometimes I was wrong, but we at least tried to get things there. I even had, as a member of my staff, that person sitting over in the corner here, so keep on him.
He trained me, remember that.
Get the blame for that.
So we'll blame him.
Blame him. So it was my beginnings, as it were. And the Munro family of 7 sons and daughters, including Bert, were always supportive of what their parents were doing in terms of taking on foster kids. And I suppose it was natural that I would pick up whatever bug it was that made people think about those sorts of things. And I managed to get through high school, went on to work with initially with the vacuum oil first. You're right, thank you, prompt. From vacuum oil, I then went into YMCA work, and from YMCA work I went into Parliament. Did 3 years as a member of Parliament for Invercargill, and went in, as it were, at a landslide time. Invercargill doesn't very often turn up National Party national candidates, but anyway, that was life.
So JB, what was the legislation that you introduced? Because it was the first legislation introduced in New Zealand that gave rights to the disabled, right? Something
That's
like
right.
that. Yeah. What was
That
it
was
called?
the
Community Welfare Act, wasn't
yeah,
it? Disabled Persons Community.
Disabled Community Welfare Act. Got that through in the last week in 1975. Right? Yeah, 75 was the last piece. It caused for me some angst because some of the party members didn't like the way in which I had gone and talked to individuals who were all sitting on the select committee for them to see it my way. Because when the vote came, we got the majority through. So that was my involvement with politicians and Parliament and so forth. But I suppose it really was my losing my seat in 1975, not having a job, not having any follow-on monies. Parliamentarians, if they are to get a pension, have got to do 9 years before any money flows by way of superannuation, which neither or all the governments that I know still haven't faced up to that one. If you haven't done 9 years service, you get no super, unless it's part of a contributory scheme that they had. So when IHC President of IHC, Donald Beasley at the time, rang me from Munro. He was a paediatrician in Whangarei, still alive, 93. When he rang, he said, look, we want you to come to Wellington and become the chief executive for IHC. As I say, I didn't have a job, and so it was good to get it. So that's really what pushed me to the point of the Hall of Fame, as it were, because 3 years ago I was honoured to have Queen's Service Order, yeah, but it was, I also had the situation of being I was going to say the keynote speaker, but it wasn't, with the television program.
Oh, Attitude. Yeah, yeah.
Because I run television programs on a Sunday morning for several years because a friend of a friend had set up an arrangement or had encouraged some of the policymakers in Television New Zealand that they had the capacity to have available about half an hour, maybe even an hour of pre-transmission time to broadcast programs. And so I was offered that for IHC, and we had on a Sunday morning at 8 o'clock, once a month, a program on disability. Now, the reaction now is that it was 15 or 20 years ago now that happened, and of course it was the forerunner for so many other programs that came at that time. But I had a lot of fun, and I got a few people who helped us significantly. Roderick Dean, Colin Meads, you name them, and they came in to help the disabled people generally. So I did 20 years with IHC as their chief executive, and a number of other voluntary responsibilities also came along. So for me to receive this from people who have been colleagues voluntarily giving of their time and their service and their wisdom and experience, it's been great. But for me, I had to accept the reality that the medical profession had diagnosed that I am in the early start of, I probably would forget the name even, Alzheimer's is haunting me, as it were. There are times when I know that something is different, but in a lot of times I just think it's a load of crap. So Val and I had lived in Dunedin for 20 years, because in my retirement I moved, we moved down to the south again. But of course age catches up with you, and so retirement came in, off the payroll, that is, you just didn't have the income. So for the last year, a little over a year, I've been, it's been assumed that I was developing Alzheimer's. Some develop Alzheimer's fast, others slow. It's an individual characteristic. But clearly I could not, in all conscience, take responsibilities on that affect other people. So I'm retired. Thank you very much. And so to be given the pleasure of being able to say that I'm a life member of the Polio New Zealand Society, and that in itself is great. The fact that I had to wait another year was not my fault or anybody else's fault, but it was appreciated, and I've had a long time for it to germinate, as it were, until today. So thank you very much for the honour and the appreciation, and I have to say that $178 from the funds of Polio have been spent on an aircraft airfare.